Although it largely recycled stages and music from the previous games, Operation C was an important game in the Contra timeline. You see, this was the first time the series had been shrunk down in order to fit on a handheld system, and this 1991 classic proved that the Game Boy was more than capable of playing fast-paced run-and-gun shooters like Contra. As a gamer in the 1990s, I always hoped that Operation C was a test run and that Konami would eventually give us a true Game Boy sequel. Sadly, Konami chose to give us a stripped-down port of Contra 3: The Alien Wars instead, which I think we can all agree is definitely not as cool as having an all-new game. Now, more than 30 years later, we're finally getting the sequel to Operation C that we should have got in the 1990s. The game is called Wild Dogs, and while it may not be directly connected to Konami, this action-packed throwback is as close to Contra as you can get without being sued into oblivion. But all these years later, is it too late for this kind of run-and-gun shooter? That's what I want to find out in this review of Wild Dogs by Second Boss. Wild Dogs takes place in an alternate version of the 1980s, where aliens invade New York City and take out the US military. Not wanting to unleash the biological weapons, the government makes the controversial decision to send in the Wild Dogs. A man and canine duo will be able to infiltrate the aliens on the street level and defeat the onslaught from the inside. It's a plan so baffling that it could work, at least in a video game. If you've played Contra, Gunstar Heroes, or really any other run-and-gun shooter released in the 20th century, then you're gonna feel right at home here. This is an action game that feels like it came straight out of the early 1990s, and I mean that in the best way possible. It's the kind of action game where you run from left to right, dodging bullets and shooting down aliens, all while grabbing more powerful weapons and staying alive long enough to take on the game's many bosses. Like I said, this is all familiar stuff. But don't let the obvious tropes and cliches fool you, because there's actually a lot going on beyond the simple run-and-gun action. This is a good-sized game spread across 5 long stages, each of which changes multiple times before reaching the final boss. For example, you may start out by dodging bullets on foot, but it won't take long before you're flying a helicopter in a traditional shoot-'em-up section, guiding a mech through a factory, or even dodging obstacles in a motorcycle stage that is straight out of Battletoads. And before you ask, yes, you do occasionally take control of the dog. In moments when Frank Pumpkinhead Williams is trapped, or we need somebody to get through a tight opening, our trusty sidekick Teddy is there to get the job done. Again, this is just one of the many smart decisions made by the developer. By splitting each level up into not only different sections, but also completely different genres of action games, you get a roller coaster ride where just about anything can happen. Now let me tell you, this game is ready to go even farther than you're expecting. As a longtime fan of Contra and this style of action game, the final 2 stages absolutely blew me away. Of course, it's nice to have the variety in the action, but what really makes the difference here is that the run-and-gun gameplay is fast, fun, and precise. The game controls exactly how you'd expect. And I like that there's an option to just stand in one place while shooting in 8 different directions. Even with the monochromatic look, it's easy to see and dodge the bullets, and the platforming elements are a breeze. Best of all, the game is constantly tossing new challenges at you in these run-and-gun sections. A good example of this is when you piss off a giant insect creature who insists on vomiting acid on the level. Not only do you need to shoot your way through a bunch of aliens that are on the ground, but you also have to find cover to protect yourself from the acid. That's a lot of fun, and it shows that the developers are thinking about how to make each section of the game even more exciting. And again, that kind of thinking pays off in a big way in the final 2 stages. Visually, Wild Dogs employs a monochromatic look that will instantly remind longtime gamers of the early versions of the Game Boy. The early stages even hint that this could have been a handheld game from the early 1990s. But don't be fooled. This could never have been made on the Game Boy. In a lot of ways, this has more in common with the over-the-top action of Contra 3 than Operation C, especially when it comes to the epic bosses. And I especially like how the developer packed each level with a bunch of different mini-bosses. There's just so much to see in each stage that you'll completely forget that this game isn't in full color. Look, I think it's clear that I like this game. Wild Dogs is a masterclass in how to make a great throwback that simultaneously honors the past, all while giving us something new. If there's a knock against it, it's that some of the sections were lifted directly from Contra with little change. But even those moments are sandwiched between some of the most inventive run-and-gun stages we've seen in decades. When everything is said and done, Wild Dogs is the kind of action game that reminds you why the run-and-gun genre was so much fun to begin with. Wild Dogs is the Contra sequel that we should have got decades ago. This brand new action game takes the run-and-gun genre to the next level with inventive level designs, fantastic bosses, and a varied story that isn't afraid to jump between genres at a moment's notice. While derivative in places, the final 2 stages of the game are among the most fun and exciting moments I've ever had in a run-and-gun shooter. Wild Dogs is not just another throwback game, because it's right up there with Contra 3 and Gunstar Heroes as one of the genre's very best. Hey, thanks for watching our review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now, here's the question I have for you. What is your favorite run-and-gun shoot-'em-up? Between Contra, Gunstar, Midnight Resistance, Metal Slug, and countless more, there are just so many to choose from. Oh, there have been some really good ones that have come out in the last 5 or 6 years. I can't wait to see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back later this week with a review of V-Hunter Puzzler DX, followed by a Star Wars-themed episode of EGM Ranks. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.